Welcome everyone to this explainer. Today, we're going to put on our forensic hats and try to solve what is, honestly, one of the greatest cold cases in the entire history of human evolution. We are tracking down the mystery of our very first words.
Okay, let's just dive right into this by painting a picture. Imagine it's 100,000 years ago. You're sitting around a campfire, you're cold, you're hungry, and suddenly you notice something massive and furry lurking just outside the firelight. You desperately want to warn your friend sitting across from you, but absolutely no meaningful words come out of your mouth. There was actually a scientifically documented time of absolute biological silence. Not a single word spoken, just humans existing in the quiet.
Which naturally brings up a really mind-bending question, right? How exactly did we make the leap from staring blankly at a mammoth to becoming a species capable of political debates, complex lies, and, internet drama? The absolute biggest hurdle in answering this is that language leaves zero fossils. You literally cannot dig up a conversation in the dirt. So we have to piece together some incredibly scattered fragments.
And this perfectly illustrates the massive evolutionary chasm we had to cross. It's the leap from an animal signal to a human symbol. See, a signal is direct. A dog growls because it feels threatened. The growl is the threat. But a symbol is totally abstract. The word danger doesn't look or sound anything like actual danger. Every single word you speak is essentially a shared social hallucination that we all just collectively agreed upon.
So, when exactly did we start hallucinating together? Well, the scientific community is basically split into two rival camps here. On one side, we've got the continuity hypothesis. They argue that language evolved incredibly slowly, just gradually building up from the simple primate calls of our ancestors. On the flip side is the discontinuity hypothesis, which says, no, there was a sudden cognitive eruption, like a specific genetic mutation or a massive leap in brain complexity that just rapidly unlocked complex syntax. To figure out who's right, we really need to look at the clues.
Let's open up our forensic puzzle box here and uncover clue number 1, the body.
Before you can even think of a word, you need the physical anatomy to speak it. And look at the unbelievable evolutionary trade-off our bodies made to get there. Take our primate cousins. Chimps have a high larynx. This is incredibly efficient because it lets them breathe and swallow at the exact same time without choking. But humans? We have a significantly lowered larynx. Now this creates a much larger resonating chamber in our throats, which is what lets us produce this vast range of complex vowels. But look at the evolutionary cost. Humans are literally the only mammals that regularly choke to death on our food. Evolution looked at the ability to speak and went, yeah, totally worth the risk of dying by choking on an ambitious sandwich.
Now, obviously soft tissue, like a larynx, doesn't fossilize, but bones do. Back in 1989, scientists found a 60,000-year-old Neanderthal hyoid bone in an Israeli cave. This is a tiny, U-shaped, floating bone in the throat that anchors the muscles used for speaking. In the Neanderthal version, it was nearly identical to a modern human's. It definitively proved that our thick-browed cousins actually had the hardware required for complex vocalizations.
But having the physical hardware isn't quite enough to guarantee speech. Which brings us to clue number 2, the blueprint.
A massive breakthrough in understanding this genetic blueprint was the discovery of the FOP2 gene mutation. Now, the media loves to casually call this the language gene. That's a huge oversimplification. But this gene is deeply tied to the super fine motor coordination you need to speak. Mice and chimps have their own versions of this gene, but the human variant has 2 totally unique mutations. And here is where it gets explosive. When scientists extracted ancient Neanderthal DNA, they found those exact same 2 human mutations. That means this specific genetic adaptation tracks back at least 400,000 years to our common ancestor.
So we have the throat anatomy and we have the genetics, but we still don't know what those first words actually were, which leads us to clue number 3, the suspects.
Linguists actually use these incredibly literal, delightfully goofy names to describe our early theories of words. First up is the highly dismissive bow-wow theory, the idea that early words were just imitations of environmental sounds, like crash or buzz. Then there's the poo-poo theory. Yes, that is a real, actual academic term. It claims language evolved from involuntary emotional vocalizations, like shouting ouch. Below that is the yo-he-ho theory, visualizing early humans making rhythmic grunts while doing heavy physical labor together. Think ancient sea shanties. And finally, my favorite, the ta-ta theory, which proposes our mouths were simply mimicking our hand gestures.
Now, I know the Tata theory sounds a little silly, but it actually points to something profound known as the gesture hypothesis. Notice how Broca's area, that's the language center in our brain, is inextricably linked to hand motor movements. In non-human primates, this exact same brain region processes manual gestures. Add to that the fact that pointing with an index finger is a uniquely human trait, and that human infants learn to point way before they ever learn to speak, it builds this really compelling argument that language actually started with our hands, and our voices just kind of caught up later.
We arrive now at the climax of our investigation, the missing link, the social brain.
Because frankly, none of these physical or genetic tools mean a thing without the cognitive infrastructure to actually use them. And this right here is the true magic trick of human communication. Theory of mind. It's the cognitive ability to understand that the person sitting right next to you has an entire complex universe of thoughts and beliefs that are completely different from your own. It's basically a form of social telepathy. When a chimp communicates, it's usually just a basic survival request. But when a human speaks, we're sharing knowledge, explicitly trusting that the other person can actually read our intentions.
So why did we even need this social telepathy? Evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar has a really fascinating answer. About 100,000 years ago, ancient human groups started getting much larger. Now, chimpanzees maintain their social bonds by literally picking bugs off of each other. But you cannot pick bugs off 150 people. It just doesn't scale. So Dunbar argues that language, and specifically gossiping, became the killer app and allowed us to maintain complex social bonds across large groups all at the same time.
Let's see how all these forensic clues finally combine into the resolution, the behavioral explosion.
Let's walk through this staggering feedback loop real quick. It starts right here at step 1. Language allows for better coordination. Better coordination then creates larger, more complex societies. Those massive societies generate an absolute ton of new information, which then puts immense evolutionary pressure on language to become even more precise. And once language is precise enough to transmit complex knowledge across generations, cultural evolution just takes off like wildfire, permanently outpacing our slow biological evolution.
So we can finally consolidate our scattered clues right here on this timeline. 400,000 years ago, the genetic wiring shows up with that FOXP2 mutation. 100,000 years ago, group sizes swell, demanding that social telepathy we just talked about. By 60,000 years ago, the Neanderthal hyoid bone proves the physical throat anatomy was locked in. And then, by 36,000 years ago, the absolutely incredible Chauvet cave paintings give us hard, visual proof of narrative, symbolic thought. Genetics, anatomy, and society utterly collided.
And the legacy of that massive collision is what Noam Chomsky famously called universal grammar. It's this brilliant idea that all 7,000 modern languages share deep structural properties that are literally hardwired right into our brains by evolution. It perfectly explains why a baby born in Tokyo and a baby born in Lagos are going to naturally learn language on the exact same timeline, without ever needing to be explicitly taught the underlying grammatical rules. The software comes pre-installed.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer today and leaves us with this one profound thought. After millions of years of random genetic mutations and incredibly dangerous evolutionary risks, the origin of language wasn't some beautiful poetry or high-minded philosophy or a grand speech. It was most likely just two people sitting in the dark, looking out at the terrifying unknown and sharing a vital piece of information to keep each other safe. Think about that the next time you strike up a casual conversation with a stranger. Are we still just using our evolutionary hardware to help each other survive the dark?